Welcome to the Monos Pod, episode 16 with Tino and Matt. What's up, Matt?
Going well, going well. We got games all day. I love Wednesdays.
That's right, especially when Marcus Semien leads off the game with the home run. We like that.
Is
On this episode,
Patriot
we
now.
are going to dig into the rookies who have debuted in the major leagues thus far this season. Lots of big names, lots of fun in our home league. Matt rosters Corbin Carroll, I roster Anthony Volpe. So we both have a tremendous amount of investment in this episode. Lots of surprises, I think, for both of us as we dug into some of the numbers. You got anything to share before we get started?
Oh, I just loved it because my complaint all last year or since we've been doing this pod was we don't have the minors numbers. They're starting to come up now with having the Savant with AAA, but it's fun to actually have kind of the under the hood numbers on players now that they're up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's revealing.
How are some of the ways in which you started like sorting with this exercise? Because really all we said was for the framework was that we're just going to talk about the debuts of rookies and how they're doing. What sorts of things did you look for? What did you sort to get the exercise started?
I started with Vegas, man. It's all about Vegas. I went to the odds of looking at the odds of the rookie of the years.
Mm-hmm.
And pulled some of them up, but some of the stuff that for hitters, wanting to see the launch angles, the EVs, your favorite, the BABIP, walks to Ks, WRC plus, breaking down the OPS with looking at their slug, and one of the things I always like is getting the actual measurement on their speed, because speed's always relative to how the scouts are seeing, but getting the sprint speed percentile off Savant is interesting as well. So, and with pitchers, I just went with their pitches, and that was really eye opening. Looking at the four seamer stats on the pitchers versus all the secondaries was it really highlights some of the struggles of somebody like G-Rod versus the non-struggles of somebody like Miller.
Mm-hmm. I did much of the same with the hitters. For the most part, I looked at rookies who had 100 plate appearances or more and took top five and in some categories, top five and bottom five in each stat. So I looked at the counting stats that we talk about for fantasy. I did take a look at some of the other metrics, of course, BABIP, because I love that one. WRC plus. I did WAR, and I know WAR takes into account defense, but WAR is just an interesting stat in general. I did look at Z contact outliers and we can get into that more, but I'll get on my zone contact soapbox for a minute. Swinging strike, and then average EV, barrel rate, that sort of thing. And then for pitchers, and then deep dives on the four hitters that have debuted that I had in my top 20, my most recent top minor league top 20. And then for pitchers, I did counting stats, WAR, K minus BB, and then I dug a little. And I'm not a huge proponent of the Fangraphs, Saris pitch model stuff, but I did do some stuff plus location plus pitching plus numbers, and then fastball, just to for some context. So I guess let's start at the top. Who have been the best rookies in your opinion thus far this season, and do you expect them to continue? We can kind of go player by player.
Okay, so this is my player, but I think the one that stands out the most consistently across the board is Corbin Carroll, right? Mm-hmm. He's the highest WRC plus, 140. His walk to K, 20% K rates, which is lower than most besides Vargas. 12%, 11% walk rate. BABIP is right around where you would think for a fast player like him, 333. His OPS splits are really cool. 379, 380 with on base percentage, 510 with slug. I think he has the highest slug of anybody I have on here. His EVs are pretty straightforward, 90%, 113 max. His launch is good. The only area where there'd be question would be the ground ball rate. That's at 48%, but with elite 100 percentile speed, that's not a huge concern for me. His splits are interesting. He's batting 304 versus lefties. That was one area that I didn't mention that I concentrated on, and it was revealing for some other players. And the interesting split here too, he's batting 312 away and 263 at home. I could see that 263 is a little shocking. I didn't check the BABIP there, but Arizona with the big outfield hitters park, I could see that increasing and the away probably going down a bit. But across the board, he's been the most consistent player. He scared the shit out of everybody by going 100% sprint speed percentile into the wall with his knee.
Yeah.
There are some issues as far as where he's batting. And even the Arizona commentators have mentioned this. When he bats third, he has usually Gurriel and Walker after him, and he's hesitant to steal. He's had some stolen base opportunities, even post, he has stolen now after his knee injury, but he's had those opportunities. And I think, there's 2 outs. And I think there's a bit of conservatism when it comes to the big RBI guy Walker up. So I like that he's batting in a 2-hole today. I eventually would want to see him in leading off, but with his power, with what he's been doing, it's debatable where you want to put him.
Yes, I agree with all that. I think he is proven so far to be the most surefire rookie. I think that he's proven already that you can count on some really tremendous production from him for the next however many years he can stay healthy, right? Because right out of the gates, there's no big warning signs with him as far as his ability. Like you, I think the double-digit walk rate coupled with the low-ish K rate are great signs. A couple things that I found interesting. So you're right that his average versus left-handed pitching is 304 versus 279 against righties, but his OPS against lefties is 725, whereas his OPS versus righties is 954. So to me, what that says is facing right-handed pitchers currently, at least, that's kind of his power side. He's looking to, I didn't look at the spray chart against left-handers, but my guess is he's trying to get on base against left-handers, and against right-handers, he's trying to do damage. And that was a really interesting differentiation for me between the two, that he was, 129 or 229 points of OPS higher against right-handed pitching. He is of the rookies with 100 plate appearances, he is number 2 in slug. Number 1 is, can you guess who number 1 is? Because I would not have been able to.
I don't have him on my chart, so I didn't look that up. Who's number 1?
Luke Raley.
Okay.
At 556. We'll talk about him later, but he was a name I did not expect to see all over the leaders.
How old is he?
Well, I want to say he's 26-ish, but give me 1 second and I can look it up. I actually have him right here. But yeah, Carroll looks to me, he's 28.
28.
Carroll looks to me like a sure thing. Like you, I wish that they would hit him one. I think, he would have that Ronald Acuna effect at the top of the lineup. I think that's where he should be. But yeah, nothing, the ground ball rate, even with that kind of speed, it means that he might not get to as much power as you'd like, but he might actually hit for a higher average and provide more steals because of it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, and this
is just now, by the way, and this is where I think it could get really good for Arizona. It's tough to criticize him, right? Because nobody expected what they're doing. So how can we criticize this start? But they led off Martell today, a single, and then Carroll doubles, And then you have Rivera batting third, but all he has to do is ground out and the run comes in. Walker grounds out. And then the question I have is, with the youth they have, how much longer are they going to tolerate Longoria? Longoria strikes out with 2 runners on. But anyway, it's just that spark at the start of the lineup of Marte Carroll could be good in a few years to come. Or
They,
few
I just
years.
I don't know what they have in the high minors that would help, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that there's the kind of reinforcements on the way to, I think Longoria obviously is a placeholder, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you look at some of the players that are in their lineup now, like Dominic Fletcher, I know he's played well, but he's not a major league starter to me. Perdomo's played well, he's not a major league starter. Pavin Smith is their DH and he let off today, which I think is kind of ridiculous. And then you look in their minors, I've got roster resource up right now. Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas, I think it's fair to say both of those are more third, fourth outfielder types.
Mm-hmm.
Seth Beer, Jake Hager. These are names that we recognize, but not names that are really worth anything, right? So,
Christian Robinson.
yeah, well, he's probably the most talented, but we don't know what he's going to turn out to be. So I
Mm-hmm.
just don't know that their organization has the players to justify. I think that they're better off riding out what they have, getting a good pick, and then drafting. And then they're a team that could use, I'd say, 2 or 3 free agents to really
Mm-hmm.
prop up the young players, because half these young players aren't going to be good. I still don't believe in Jordan Lawler. I don't think Lawler is their shortstop of the future, right? I don't believe in Drew Jones necessarily. So we'll see what
Mm-hmm.
happens. But interesting organization.
Mm-hmm. I think they did well on the Varsho trade. They traded Varsho high. They got the
Agreed.
catcher of the future with Moreno, and Gurriel's always been a solid contributor. So
Varsho's so interesting. I don't know why people are in love with him. They're so quick to talk about his successes and so quick to defend his, if you see him as a failure, he's hitting 211, 280, 372.
mm-hmm.
372 is his slug. So his OPS currently is 652, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was always kind of a low OPS guy that was going to put up home runs and steals. But I don't think anyone was willing to admit that he's not a high average hitter. He doesn't walk a ton, right? He's ran a double-digit walk rate once in his rookie year in 2020, and he has horrendous platoon splits. He's a strong side platoon plus defensive outfielder
Mm-hmm.
who's certainly not worth, like, if you consider him a top, 2, top 3 catching prospect in the game. I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was ridiculous at the time. I still maintain that it is.
And
That was
he's losing his catcher eligibility and
totally.
losing
So what is
value.
his value once he's not a catcher anymore, right?
Mm-hmm. All
Back
right,
to
back.
Carroll real quick. So fantasy, for this is a fantasy comment. You and I talk about this a lot, right? It's kind of OPS or homers and steals are king. You can supplement runs with having players in a certain position in the order who get on base. RBIs can be hard to find at times, but obviously based on where they hit in the order, you can find those. But stolen bases and home runs are the two things that you and I particularly tend to value, right? Because if you have those two things, the other stuff tends to fall into place. And this is not because I roster Anthony Volpe and I love him, but I found it fascinating that, the narrative around Carroll is obviously, and deservedly so, that he's been incredible thus far in his major league career. He's the NL Rookie of the Year. He's played incredibly well. I love him. I think he's going to be great for 10, 15 years. And the narrative with Volpe is, why are they keeping him up? They moved him down to 6 in the order. He hasn't done anything that anybody expected yet. His triple slash currently is 207, 291, 670. However, Anthony Volpe has 20 runs. Corbin Carroll has scored 30. So Carroll wins that one. They each have 7 home runs. They each have 13 steals. And Volpe has 20 RBIs versus Carroll's 17. And I'm not here to say that Volpe's played better. What I'm here to say is if homers and steals are the two things that we value the most, right? They're equal, right? They're equal. And Volpe has really struggled. So, and then you also have positional, eligibility, which to me is very important. And Volpe being a shortstop makes it a huge deal for me. But this is only to say,
And who surrounds Volpe too, right? That comes into consideration as
right.
well.
So in
You
my
know,
mind, I think about Volpe and I'm like, okay, he's struggling. He's barely hitting 200. He's got an under 300 on base percentage, and he's still on pace to hit, 20, low 20s home runs and have 40 steals. So I think it's important to differentiate real life and fantasy as far as how we're judging these players, and recognize the fact that you can have a player who's playing really well in real life and not have a ton of fantasy value, and you can have a player who's seen as not performing in real life and actually have tremendous fantasy value. And I think Volpe right now fits that. If we can move on to him really quickly,
yep, I
despite
have his
his
stuff here.
despite his struggles, he still is running a 10.2% walk rate. The K rate's a little surprising to me at 30.6%. Is a 12.2% swinging strike rate. I've seen him get fooled a lot, and his eye is very, very good. And so I think there's some guessing right now as opposed to trusting his instincts. I've also seen him called out on some horrendous called strike threes. So he's getting a bit of that Julio treatment from last year. He's got a 44%.
What's going on versus lefty pitching? Do you see
I
that as
don't
a fluke
know.
and something that's going to adjust?
Yeah, I think that I think he's one who's really comfortable against uh right-handed pitching. What I've seen is he really wants to extend his arms, right? He's hitting really well. I think the sweeper and the fastball are the two pitches he has positive run values against. And I think part of it is because he can identify the sweeper and then he's able to extend on it. Because you've seen his swing. It's a pretty violent swing with extension and a lot of loft. And so that's my guess, is that he's less comfortable with the ball coming into his body than he is with the ball running away from his body. His all of his savant stats, the percentile stats, that the average EV 64th percentile, hard hit 70th, barrel 72nd. So the physicality of his game is there. I didn't expect him to be in the 90th percentile in any of those, because he's more of, like, I've compared him to Simeon and to Alex Bregman, in that he knows how to hit the ball, not necessarily how hard to hit the ball. And then his speed is 83rd. So the strikeouts he needs to work on. He has gotten a little unlucky too. I think his XBA is according to Fangraphs is 226 and he's hitting 207, and his X slug is 408. And so I think that he's gotten a bit unlucky. And then one other thing to add with him. So his expected home runs by park, he has 7, but he would have had 12 if he was hitting in Tampa, Philadelphia, or Cincinnati. So I think there's even more power than he's shown. This is something I want to bring up. I think this is the right time to bring it up. We'll dig in more. So his zone contact is 79.2%, right? Which at first glance, what would most prognosticators say when they saw that? They'd want it to be higher, right? I think that there's the gravitation towards these high zone contact guys as better hit tool type of players. We always tease and bring up Keibert Ruiz, but he's a great example, right? Because his sits around 90%. And so, and then I look at Corbin Carroll and he's 84.8, which is very good for a player who swings as hard and makes as much and causes as much damage as he does. We know that there's been a lot of strikeouts with Gunnar Henderson. His is at 74.1, and Tristan Casas, who's at 76.7. But so I sorted for here, I'm going to bring it up. I did top, where is it at here? I did top 5 zone contact percentage for rookies with over 100 plate appearances, and then I did bottom 6, and here are the names. Okay, so the number one in zone contact for rookies is Alec Burleson at 94-1, right? He's built like a player you would expect to be a good hitter. He hasn't been yet. Number 2 is Zach Neto at 90.2%. Number 3 is Will Brennan at 89.6. Number 4,
Neto can make that much contact with that leg kick.
Yeah, right. Number 4 is Alex Call at 89.1, and number 5 is Masa Yoshida at 89%, who I would expect to be there given the fact that he has been a professional in Japan and that is a part of his profile. So I look at that list. There's no one on that list, maybe outside of Yoshida, who kind of doesn't count, that I see as a rookie having any sort of impact, right? Offensively. And then the bottom 6 are Edouard Julien, who had fewer than 100 plate appearances, but I think matters in this.
He just lit off with a home run about 5 minutes ago, by the way.
Nice. 65.5% zone contact. Francisco Alvarez at 72.1, who's become a very good hitter already. Blake Sable, who's on the top of a ton of these lists at 74.8. Gunnar Henderson at 75.8. James Outman, who is slumped but has put up great numbers as a rookie thus far at 77.3. And Ryan, I almost said Masa Noda, who was a Japanese student at Michigan with me as a freshman.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
Yeah, Ryan Noda at 77.8. So when I look at that bottom list, I see players who do damage. I see players I want on my fantasy team, right? At the right price, I'd love to have Julian. Absolutely love to have Alvarez. I'd love to have Gunnar. I'd love to have Outman, and I'd love to have Ryan Noda. And those are the 5 of the bottom 6. And when I look at the top 5, the only one I will really have interest in is Yoshida, and he doesn't count. So, and then if we look at the players that we talked about, the first 2, Volpe is just below. He's at the next group of the ones who are at the low end of the zone contact outliers. My point is, I hate that stat. Yes, it tells a story if the player has a 60% zone contact rate, right? Is that something to worry about with Julien at 65.5? 100%. 100%. But if they're somewhere between like low 80s and mid 70s, I almost want that, because it means that when they do hit the ball, oftentimes they're doing damage. So,
and I shook my head on Julian too. We don't have it's not a huge sample size, right? He's coming out aggressive.
It's not.
And why I think that's important is some of these players come out very passive, picky. They may have the zone contact, but they're not making quality contact at all.
Right.
So sometimes I want them to come out aggressive and then adjust from that.
Right. We have the two players next on my list, Gunnar Henderson and Tristan Casas, are running 16.1 and 16.2% walk rates, respectively. But both of them are hitting 201 and 181, and they're striking out a ton. They're learning how to be selective at the plate. They're learning how to see what pitches they want to hit. They're both running mid-70s zone contact rates. They're not producing in the way that people expected, but I expect them to learn. I like the fact that they're trying stuff and they're going to have to adjust, right? And if they were hitting everything like that high-end percentage of zone contact, I think it's harder to teach a guy to be more selective, right, than it is to go from a high zone contact to picking your pitch and hitting it harder than it is to go from walking too much and taking too many pitches and starting to be a little bit more aggressive. And I think the names we see at the low end of that zone contact list are the names that are at the top of the prospect list.
Well, look at I know Judge's numbers. I haven't checked Ohtani's. This is just on a hunch and watching both of them. But how many times do we hear, "Oh my God, I can't believe they hit that pitch out," right? As far as the location of that pitch, they have great reach and they'll swing outside a zone and hit the shit out of the ball.
Right.
So it's really a misnomer as far as how that relates to quality of hit.
Right. So here are the names of the players who qualify for a batting title. major leagues. I'm going to name all 23 players who are below 80% zone contact. Okay. These are the 23 players below 80% zone contact for those who qualify for a batting title. Number 23 at 79.9%, Mike Trout. Paul Goldschmidt, Trent Grisham, Patrick Wisdom, Teo Hernandez, Shea Langoliers, Trevor Larnach, Dansby Swanson, Joey Weimer, Cal Raleigh, Brian De La Cruz, Trey Turner, Brian Anderson, Ryan McMahon, Randy Arozarena, Jazz Chisholm, James Outman, Aaron Judge, Brent Rooker, Gunnar Henderson, Jack Sawinski, Matt Olson, MJ Melendez. Those are the 23 players below 80% zone contact who qualify for a batting title as of right now. 2/3 of those guys are stars, right? So and then the names right after 80% are Nick Maton, who's terrible, Tristan Casas, Javier Baez, but then Rafael Devers and Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, right there.
Maybe we need to flip the perspective of that particular stat, like completely on its head. That's crazy to me to look at. And then the top 10, I'll be done with this in a minute. The top 10 zone contact hitters qualifying for a batting title as of right now. Number 1 is Luis Arraez at 97.3. Stephen Kwan, Alex Verdugo, Nico Horner, Ke'Bryan Hayes, Tommy Edman, Isaac Paredes, Alex Bregman, Keibert Ruiz, Matt Vierling. Right? Which one do you want? It's crazy. Like it's really interesting to me to look at that.
The data speaks.
Go ahead.
The data speaks.
It does. So those players are important in real life. And some of those players I just read in the high zone contact area, I like as players. And I would roster them in fantasy, but they're like the end of my roster. The other guys were the superstars. So I just find that really interesting. It's not to say that a low zone contact is indicative of a star, but it is to say that, we have to start asking questions about these stats and not just accepting them because someone else is saying that this is what we should accept, right?
Everybody's looking for that secret formula, right?
Yep.
And a lot of this goes back to what I mentioned before, that huge Baseball America article a few years ago as far as contact rates in the minors and how that translates into the majors.
Yeah.
But that was just going off the simple contact rate stat. It wasn't going into, the microscopic zone contact and all the contact stats underneath it. And the other point it was making, which is often forgotten, is contact needs to be coupled with exit velocity.
Yep.
And how well that hitter also sprays the ball, right? How well that hitter takes the pitch and knows where to go with that pitch.
Right.
That was all considered in looking at Vlad Jr. in the minors. And it seems like the industry just really focused in on that contact piece, which is forgetting, 2/3 of the other form of that formula, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I think it really highlights how we get so caught up in one metric and don't see kind of the holistic approach here.
It's one of those to me that I think everyone just kind of bought into because others were saying it. And it just, there's a narrative to every player. And all of these stats relate to one another in some way. It's more about understanding the relationship between the stats that you value than it is isolating on one particular stat, right? Because
exactly,
a player can have a high zone contact rate and be a star, right? Or be a top 5 player at their position, fantasy wise. Wander Franco is number 12 right now at a 93% zone contact rate, right? Vinny Pasquantino is number 14. Like, those are valuable players, but it's because they also hit the ball hard and they're also swinging very hard. Like I think as we start to get some of the swing speed metrics, that is also going to really change how people see things, because part of why Aaron Judge's zone contact rate is so low is because he swings so hard, right? Or the angle with which a player swings. If they have an uppercut swing, their bat is in the zone a lot less than a player with a flat swing. But the uppercut swing is also creating loft, which creates home runs. So there's just
one of the more amazing standouts. Everybody knows Vinny has the eye, right? And he knows the zone. I think he's second in the league on highest chase rate. Which is quite interesting. He gets in 1 and 2, 0 and 2 counts because he's swinging hard and going after pitches.
Right.
And he has one of the best averages on 2-strike pitches, right? And that goes back to the narrative of the player, right? We need to understand pitch by pitch what their strategy is, why they're chasing. It makes sense to chase early on a pitcher if you know you could hit the shit out of the ball, right?
Right.
So
or your ability to understand, smart hitters that understand or have an advanced understanding of what pitch is coming, right? If you're the type of hitter that has like the super brain and you know what's coming, you might sell out for a fastball. When another hitter who doesn't have that information might swing less hard or just try to make contact because they're just trying to see the ball hit the ball, right? There's so much to each player, so much narrative to each player.
And that's what makes it makes what we're doing so fun, right? There's just so much depth to it in understanding, the narrative of each player coming to bat, the narrative of prospects coming up. It's you can't put it in a box, and that's what makes baseball so fun.
Totally. Let's take a quick break. We'll come right back and dive into your favorite player, Josh Young. All right, Matt. Are we going to go into Gunnar and Tristan Casas, or do we want to dig more into the leaders?
Yeah, I didn't do Casas, but I know him well enough to deal with that. Yeah, we could do Gunnar. Gunnar's quite interesting here. Oh shit. I gotta hit that. Okay, so Gunnar WRC plus 103. You mentioned his high K rate, 31% K rate, his high walk rate, 16%. BABIP is at 278. You expect that to go up a little bit. OPS, the slug side of his OPS is what caught my eye, but then his exit velocities aren't are really good. So, I'm wondering how much he is having these hard hits that are just not getting down right now. His launch is good, 12.8. Nothing concerning. And here's the improvement. Last year, his ground ball rate was 51%. This year it's at 41%, which is quite interesting. His launch last year was 2.0 and now it's at 12.8. So I see improvement here. There's a lot under the hood that he's a wonderful buy low for me. We have somebody in the league that has him that's smart enough not to do that.
Stubborn enough not to do that, I think, is a better way to put it.
But I've been trying. What's a concern here are his splits versus lefties. So 129 versus lefties, no extra base hits versus lefties either. It's all been singles, and he was 130 versus lefties last year. So to be kind of that third baseman that you trust, that you could put in your lineup, that's going to be a consistent producer, that's a big sign right there for me versus lefties. I think he's good enough that they're going to persist with that. He'll persist. The numbers are going to go up. But like if he was a platooner type, that would concern me, like a Gorman, right? But I think he's better than Gorman. He knows his zone much better than Gorman. I think that will adjust. But right now, as far as a red flag, that's the biggest red flag versus lefties now. But the other stuff under the hood, he's a wonderful buy low, in my opinion, especially in that lineup too.
I agree. I think there's two numbers that I found to add to what you said. His swing percentage is very low compared to league average. He swung 39.4% of the time. League average is 47.1, which is what you see if you watch him. You see him just taking a ton of pitches. Interestingly, his I just looked, his called strike percentage is almost 19%,
Wow. Okay.
18.9%, and his swinging strike rate is 12.8. So I don't love CSW as a stat because I think there's too much subjectivity to it. But he's at 31.7% CSW, which is very high, and that's mostly because of the called strike rate. And then his whiff percentage is 9.9% higher than league average as well. So he's swinging a lot less than the normal player. And when he does swing, he's swinging and missing 10% more than the average player. So that's part of why his average is so low. He's not making very much contact. His zone contact rate is 74.1%. Obviously, we talked about how that's not a death nail, but it's still not good. You spoke to the platoon splits that are pretty ugly. I also, despite the walk rate, he in the 335 on base percentage, he only has one steal. And he is 84th percentile sprint speed on Savant, but he's a player whose value preseason, we talked about his value having a very high baseline because of what we thought would be a 15-20 steal player that we could count on. And if he's not going to run, now you're talking about a strong side platoon hitter for this year. Strong side platoon guy that's going to hit for power, low average, and not steal bases. So I think the skills are there. The talent is there. I think he's 21, 22, right? He's 21 in 10 months, 25 days. A 22-year-old player. From a dynasty standpoint, I still think he has tremendous value. But this year, I do wonder in a redraft if he's not a cut candidate for me, but I might be trying to pick up the next best third baseman on the wire or someone I can platoon him with at minimum. Tristan Casas, current triple slash 181, 312, 666 OPS, 154 plate appearances, 19 runs, 6 homers, 15 RBIs, no steals. We talked about the walk rate being very high, 27.3% K rate. 210 BABIP, which is very, very low. You would expect his average to come up, but his XBA is, according to Fangraphs, is only 208. And then the X slug is 428. It's not like he's hitting a ton of balls in the air. 39.1% ground ball rate, 11.1% swinging strike, which isn't bad. I think he will come around. I'm not too worried about Tristan Casas. I think he's going to hit probably for more power than he did in the minor leagues. To me, he looks like your semi-boring, 260, 270 hitter with 25 home runs, a high OBP, and a player you always want more from. What's the difference between Casas and, say, I don't know, like a Ryan Mountcastle? Or I'm gonna find some other fun ones to comp him to. But he
does have the on base percentage versus the Mountcastle, right?
He does.
He's kind of and he's not boring when it comes to personality. He's fun to watch. Sure. But as far as in comparisons, like to me, like what you just said, he's kind of like that. What everybody was expecting of Nick Johnson a while back, kind of that high OPS guy, and everybody thought Johnson was going to explode. But he never, there were injury issues there, and he never he met that. But still, at the same time, he had that consistent approach that wasn't going to hurt you as a fancy first baseman.
Right. There's, I look at where I have him ranked in redraft coming into the season. I had him 14th between Josh Bell and Rowdy Tellez. And to me, Josh Bell and Rowdy Tellez are two players you just kind of always want more from. And especially Josh Bell. But is Casas different than Nathaniel Lowe or Anthony Rizzo or even like a Reese Hoskins or CJ Cron, right? They're all players who are rosterable and decent starting first basemen, both in redraft and in dynasty, but they're not players you're going to prioritize. They're not players you're going to chase and send 3 different trade offers looking to acquire that player. And I don't know if Casas is ever going to become that for the Red Sox. I don't think he has that elite talent, right? He's like a 55 hit, 60 power, but you always want to see the 65 power and it just never shows up. That's what he says. That's what he looks like to me. All right. Anything else on Casas for you?
Nope.
So, and you did a couple more deep dives, correct? For hitters?
Yeah, so I did Young, Vargas, Ruiz, and Outman.
Cool.
As far as the people that come up. Young is interesting. I had him in the offseason, traded him because his K rate frightened me. I think anybody right now in the Texas lineup is going to help you. He's definitely has that part for his advantage. He is hitting at a 92 EV rate, 109 max. He kills lefties, 340 batting average versus lefties. His launch is gets backspin along with the EV. His launch is 18%. 333 BABIP, nothing too concerning there.
He just singled against Oviedo, by the way.
Yeah, he did. 38% sprints. So he's not going to be that athletic third baseman for you when it comes to 5 category stuff. He's that 3 category third baseman. I think we've always said that he's kind of that 3 category dependable third baseman. Not going to be in the top 5, but can be between 5 and 10 when it comes to rankings of third baseman. So he's basically doing what was expected on the high side, right? So he's not dominating elite, but at the same time, he's doing quite well for a rookie. To make a comparison then to another third baseman, but now he's playing second, is Vargas. Vargas is at a 107 WRC. His walk to K is really solid, 18% K rate, 13% walk rate. He's the best out of any deep dive I've done here. His BABIP is lower. I think it could go up. It's at 265. So you'll see an increase there. What is concerning with him is OPS splits are 331, 412. The 412 with slug, I would have expected better. His EV is at 86.5, which is interesting because nobody was really pointing this out as far as his hard hit. When we go back to Volpe, everybody was questioning his hard hit. And Volpe's at 90, 91% EV. Vargas is at 86.5. When it comes to Vargas's power, too, this is where it's concerning, too. Most of his extra base hits are pull side. So they've talked about him being an all fields hitter, but I want to see that in the data, right? He's most of his opposite field stuff has just been singles hit to the opposite end. His power's coming from pull side. So he's a solid player, great at second base, I think. That eligibility will help in the next 2 or 3 years. He'll probably move off that position, I think, eventually. But yeah, so let me
ask you, what do you see has the information from the end of last season and the beginning of this season? I think we're like almost 30% into the season now. Does that change your long-term perspective on Miguel Vargas? What do you see Miguel Vargas as at his peak, and how would you value him in Dynasty?
I could see him being, at second base between a 6 to 10 rank. But he can hit 300. I don't see him going over 20 home runs consistently. I could see his OPS being in the 800s. If he moves to third, that's when it becomes a case where it's going to hurt your fantasy team, I think, because he's not going to have those numbers that a Young is going to produce at third base that you want at a corner position. So his value to me is at second base.
Do you think he's going to run?
No.
because I
I,
think that
I
it really elevated his rank coming.
yeah,
People got kind of they latched on to the 94th percentile sprint speed last year
yeah.
and assumed that that was going to translate into stolen bases this year. And I think that gave him a lot of helium that he may not have actually deserved.
Exactly. Yeah. And I rostered him pretty early when he started to sprout in the minors, and that never really stood out until he was called up, and his first game, I think he had that triple, and then he stole third base,
Yep.
and that got the hype rolling. But he's at 71% sprint this year.
Yep.
And I don't think speed was ever a big part of his game. You know, he could have over 10 steals, but he's not going to be over 20. So yeah, I think he's that average, dependable, solid second baseman that if he goes to a corner is going to put you below other teams in head-to-head fantasy.
Right. I I think coming into the season, I saw him as low 20s home runs, probably double digit steals. You know, at second, that's pretty elite. At third, that's still somebody that you want. Um, and I don't want to say that 150 plate appearances will completely change my perspective on a player, but I'm starting to think that he's closer to a high average, high OBP player with less power and less speed than we anticipated, right? And we just 20 minutes ago talked about the importance of home runs and stolen bases in fantasy. And that's a player who's dependent, whose fantasy value is very much tied to where they hit in the order and how good the offense is that they play in, right? And so if Vargas is hitting second or he's hitting fifth in that Dodgers lineup, and that's where they plant him for good, he's going to have value. If he's hitting 6, 7, 8, right? A lot less value. So he's one that I'm a lot less in on than I was previously. You know, if I look at the second base, my preseason second base redraft list, I I don't know how many of these guys I'm taking him over, right? At this point in time. And I don't know that I would have expected to say that given the name value.
Mm-hmm.
And then Josh Young is, so he's third. This is based on rookies who have had 100 plate appearances or more. He's third in plate appearances. He's first in home runs with 11. He's first in runs with 33. He's first in RBIs with 33. Where else does he show up here? There's one other stat I think that I saw, but he's not in the top 5 in WRC plus, interestingly enough. He's fourth in slug at 492. He's not in the top 5 in WAR. So he looks, so far at least, 13.1% barrel, which is fourth.
Mm-hmm.
He's a player who I think, as you said, I think we're seeing the high side of who he can be, but he looks like your perennial 260, 25 home run, 80 run, 80 RBI, third baseman who is going to hit 350 against lefties and 235 against right-handers. And
Mm-hmm. The mirror side of a Kyle Seager, right?
yeah, so I'm clicking on my third base redraft list and I had him 15th. Does he fit in this group with Brandon Drury, who hasn't played well, obviously, Eugenio Suarez, Matt Chapman, Cabrian Hayes, Alec Boehm, Ryan McMahon? I had Yohan Moncada there, but that's because I love him. Is he good enough to put in the Arenado, Bregman? If Gunnar Henderson starts to play and run, is he good enough to be in that group? Not for me, right? Not for me. I think he's just below that group. He's probably at the high end of the bottom group. So where's that put him? 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that range for the next 6, 8 seasons. Is that a keeper in our league? Maybe, right? Kind of. Is that an asset in Dynasty? Sure. It's not like it's easy to find, but it's also not like he's going to win you the league. That's the kind of player I see with him.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts with Young?
Nope. No.
And
I
did
would
you?
say, and the contrast with rostering, so I wanted to do this with Ruiz. The contrast of rostering a Ruiz versus Vargas. Ruiz in some leagues has that second base eligibility this year because of his minors, but he'll lose it this year. But he's 98% split. His WRC plus is larger than Vargas right now. He's 109. His walk rate is a lot less, right? 4% walk rate. He does have an 18% K rate, the same as Vargas. His OPS splits are actually close to Vargas. He's 344 and then 376. Most of his power, as we've always talked about, is his pull side power. His launch isn't too high, so which is good for a player like him. He's at 10% launch. His BABIP is at 350, but with somebody with that elite speed, you'd expect that.
Pretty normal for him, yeah.
46% ground ball rate, 24% line drive rate. That's exactly what you want from the hitter. And he's leading the league in stolen bases, right? So he's a valuable asset for a fantasy team. He's not going to be that super that super 5 category player, but he's going to help you be competitive in steals, which is a very good asset now in this new era.
Well, in our league, if he's hitting at the top of the lineup and he's hitting 270 or 280, your hits are important too, right? So he could be a 180 to 200 hit type of player, even if he's not tremendously valuable in real life. He's still providing that category. If he's getting on base, if he's getting that many hits, you're looking at somewhere between 80 and 100 runs. And he's probably going to be in the top 3 in steals, right? One way or another. That's a very valuable player as long as he's not a 0 in power and OPS. I think that's to me, we're seeing him hit the high end of what we expected from him. What will differentiate for me whether he is an asset, like a big asset, or just another player with some fun stats, is whether he can take the home run number up to double digits. Whether his OPS is something that you can swallow, right? And that you can pair him with other players with higher OPSs, right? If he's like a sub 700 OPS guy with tons of steals and runs, that's difficult. If he's around between 730 and 760, now you're talking about a really good outfielder. So, and he's also a blast to watch. I really have loved watching him play. Plays with electricity, right? His hair is on fire a bit, and he brings a lot of energy to that Oakland team. I know how shitty they've been thus far, but with him and Noda and Rooker, and they've got some fun stuff going on. I think
they're fun to watch.
Fun players
he just need to show up
for sure. And then Outman was the other one you did, right?
Yeah, Outman was the other one I did. I was just curious as far as that goes. He's at the 34% K rate, which was expected to be high. There's nothing really that stands out either way. I was trying to say, well, is he a fluke, or is he doing what is under the hood would be expected? So there's 9.7 walk rate is good, right at 10%. His BABIP is 337, nothing weird there. 106 WRC plus. His EVs are a little lower than I thought. His average EVs at 88. But he's that athletic outfielder that could do some good for a fantasy team. But at the same time, I don't see him being this 5 category hype that was advertised when he got off to that hot start. And he's at 86% sprint speed. He's not in the 90th percentile. So I think his speed is a little overrated as well. And he doesn't have, like a Volpe or a Gunnar. He doesn't have that kind of the skill of base running that both of them have. So he's just that athletic converted football player that will do well for the Dodgers, but he's not that 5 category stud that's going to be at the top of fantasy lists for years to come.
Right. I expected him to have greater splits. He's only had 40 plus plate appearances against left-handers, but he's performed really well. The OPS against left-handers is 870 and right-handers is 873. He had a really hot start, March and April, 292, 376 OBP, 991 OPS. In May, it's 179, 273 OBP, and a 601 OPS. So part of my fear is that Major League Pitching has found holes in his approach. I think what I see in Outman is a tremendous asset as a fourth outfield, strong side platoon type player. Interestingly, we talked, I think we talk offline or online about Dalton Varsho? I think they're similar, right? I think that they're both athletic, left-handed hitting, plus outfield defense, plus outfield defensive players who function best on a team where there are two outfielders that play every day, and the other outfielder is a lefty masher, right? Who they can, for the most part, platoon with. And that doesn't mean Outman's not a positive, right? I think this is a weird comp, but I think of like Jock Peterson as a positive addition to any team. Peterson's going to give you probably more power and less speed. Outman's going to give you better defense, a little more speed, a little less power. Huge asset to a team. Fantasy wise, unless you are surrounding them with the right players, he's not going to be your outfield two, right?
That Peterson comp is right on too, because Peterson came up as that 5 category guy. He came up as a speedster, put weight on, turned into that power hitter.
Right. So, Outman he had a lot of publicity when he first, like in the first month of the season. I think he settles in as a 240 to 260 hitter who's going to have 450 plate appearances and probably 20 home runs and potentially 10 steals. So great rate stats, play him at the right times, an asset at the end of your team, but not necessarily a centerpiece. That's what I see, at least. All right, so a couple more. I did top 5 for players eligible with, I guess, rookies with 100 plate appearances or more. I'll read some of these. Stop me if there's anything interesting. Top 5 plate appearances: Ruiz, Volpe, Young, Spencer Steer at 192, and then Outman. Home runs. All right, here's a player. So Josh Young with 11, and then tied with 9, Luke Raley and James Outman. Did you have any idea that Raley was going to show up on any of these lists?
No, I didn't. I was looking at him a couple weeks ago, and then I just saw him as a typical platoon player and Tampa player. But no, I wouldn't have guessed he would show up outside of the home runs.
So here's where he showed up. So Raley, 9 home runs, which ties him for second. This is, again, 100 plate appearances or more for a rookie. The next place he showed up was, give me 1 second here, 33.1% K rate, which was 3rd highest. Outman 33.9, Blake Sable 36.1. Let's see, I've got him. There's a couple other. Okay, so slug, he's number 1 at 556. We talked about that. WRC plus, he's number 1 at 144. WAR, Fangraphs WAR, he's number 3 at 1.3. OPS, he's number 2 behind Carroll at 878. So he's a player who, and then he's number 1 average exit velocity at 93.2 and number 1 with barrel at 21.7. What do you do with that, right?
Is he being platooned in Tampa? Is he pinch hit for during games?
Yeah, I think he's a great example of just what Tampa does, right? It's why Manzardo is scary. It's why Mead is scary for me, because you look at those numbers are phenomenal. You want to roster that player, but if you were to roster that player, you don't know when he's playing, right? So you have to have another first baseman. You have to have another first baseman on your team in order to roster him. So, yeah, I don't when I look at I haven't paid attention to their box scores that clearly, but yeah, Paredes plays first. Harold Ramirez plays first. They're both right-handed. Yandy Diaz plays first. He's also right-handed. So yeah, Rayleigh comes out. I think it's safe to say that Rayleigh comes out when there's a tough left-handed pitcher. But I was very surprised to see him as high on those lists. Kind of a fun one. Homers, Carroll and Volpe tied for fifth with 7. Runs, usual suspects, Young, Carroll, Outman, Yoshida. But fifth in runs is Gunnar Henderson. So something interesting to think about, that walk rate will help you carry runs, or has helped him carry runs up to this point. RBIs, I was surprised to see Ruiz tied for 4th with Vargas at 22. Steals, Ruiz is destroying everyone with 25. Ji-Hwan Bae has 14. Carroll and Volpe 13, and then Doyle and Terang at 7. Walk rate, Ryan Noda, someone we talked about a little bit as a sleeper, but he's at 21% walk rate. And to me, that just, we've had debates, especially on the Baseball and Coffee Pod, about walk rate being valuable. To me, you're on base, you can score, you can steal bases. I love that high walk rate.
Is he a Dodger cast off? He
Rule 5. And then lowest walk rates. So here's a couple players. So lowest walk rates: Corey Julks, Houston pop-up 2.4%. Will Brennan 3.5% for the Guardians.
That's shocking with Brennan.
Yeah, Ruiz 3.7, which is, I think as he gets older, it'll go a little bit higher, but it's never going to be a good walk rate. Ezekiel Tovar 3.7%. Zach Neto 3.7%. So those are 2 players a lot of prospect folks really liked coming into the season, right? And not just real life prospect guys, but like fantasy prospect guys, talked them both up. Tovar was top 20 on some lists towards the end of last year. And Neto is someone that everyone was keeping an eye on. Where are you with those 2 as of right now?
I think Tovar is still potential Gold Glove shortstop, right?
I think but go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm just saying why he was on a lot of lists, right? So on Just Baseball, he was high, but Just Baseball is not fantasy oriented necessarily. Baseball America, not fantasy oriented necessarily, even though both are trying to move in that direction. And they're considering that defense, right? And I think we said this from the start, that as far as playing time and team sticking with players, the 2 true shortstops were Wynn and Tovar, right? But at the same time with Tovar, it's he doesn't have the under the hood metrics to have him be that fantasy baseball player that you want at short. That's gonna stick out for you versus other teams, especially in head to head, or even in accumulating stats in a roto league. So yeah, he's that Gary Templeton, I think, type of player that's great defense, not gonna do anything really that stands out offensively. And I think Colorado is starting to be, as far as Colorado and hit goes, it's not the number 1 park anymore when it comes to hitting. Cincinnati's the number 1 park.
Right, not even close.
So I think there's still that kind of the vestiges of Colorado, the sexiness of Colorado hitting that's with a lot of people who've played fantasy for a long time, and that just needs to be pushed aside now. I
agree. Any other hitters of interest that you want to bring up? We've covered most of them, I think.
Yeah, we covered most of them. There's the more recent ones that will be interesting once they start accumulating more stats. I will put McLean is at 93 sprint speed percentile, which is interesting coming up.
Who's that?
Matt McLean.
Oh. I still think he's super utility.
He went Oppo yesterday, which was nice.
I saw that. That was I didn't see how many parks that would have been a home run in, but I'm guessing it's probably
hey man, it's like
digits.
It's like the Bregman thing, right? You got to take advantage.
Absolutely.
So should we do pitching when we come back?
Yeah, let's take a quick break and we'll dive into pitching. Actually, before we take a break though, overall, do you have any thoughts about these rookies that we've talked about thus far? I know we've got some really great rookies on the way. You know, Ellie, I'm guessing, is going to be up in the somewhat near future. Jordan Walker will be back up pretty soon. Jackson Churio maybe at the end of this year, but probably the beginning of 24. Mason Wynn we might see mid-season if he can hit. I think Noelvi Marte is on the cusp.
Yes.
Marcelo Mayer is raking right now. I think he's probably start of 24. And then Tyler Soderstrom's in AAA, and I think it's only a matter of time before he's called up as well. So there's a lot of talent on the way. But of the guys we talked about thus far, are you surprised overall as a group that they performed as well as they have? Did you expect more from them?
I don't think there's any major surprises. I think the biggest surprise for me is on the downside with Gunnar, but as I've said, I don't think it's any concern.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is just a very because of COVID and just because of the way things have lined up, this is a very transitional year. A lot of young players are coming up. And that's what makes dynasty and hybrid leagues fun because now you have people that you've looked at for the last 3 years. They're coming up and you actually now have data on them. Yeah. And it's fun to follow them too on the emotional side, as far as seeing their first at bats, seeing families celebrate them when they come up. So yeah, it's an exciting time for MLB.
One last question. Of the players that have debuted in the majors already, excluding Jordan Walker, because he's in the minors right now, how many of these guys do you consider elite? And when I think of elite, I think of a player who, fantasy-wise, differentiates your team at a position, right? So if you have that, the easiest example for me is when you had Buster Posey at catcher in his prime, you had an enormous advantage against any other team you're playing against in head-to-head, because Posey was twice the player everyone else's catcher was. He's the epitome of elite, but elite to me is top 3, top 5 at the position, and potentially a first-round pick in their prime. Are any of these players that we've talked about elite in your mind?
If I expand it out to maybe the first 3 rounds of a 12-team league, so that'd be like top 50 players. Carroll's already in the top 50. I can see Gunnar hitting the top 50 if he gets the speed stolen bases. I can see Volpe there. As far as the other players, nope. But I do have this love for Ruiz though. Because I think he is a different. He is that, maybe not so much in the one category fantasy thing, but he is that like baseball card everybody wants now, just because of the 25 steals. He realistically could hit the Billy Hamilton Gordon range of 80 steals this year.
Sure.
Which is fun.
It is super fun. Yeah, I think Carroll's a no-brainer first rounder. I think Volpe is too, honestly. Because I think Volpe may have a down season, like I said, average wise, and still hit 25 home runs and steal 40 bases. So,
and remember, he has that pattern of initially struggling at every level, right? Yep. So his first year he struggled, broke out the next year, and when he went to AA last year, he struggled, broke out, then went to AAA, broke out. So yep. So I could see a second half breakout of Volpe for this year.
If we assume that we're about at the third of the way mark, and he plays just slightly better than he has, you're talking about 25 home runs. So he's at 7 home runs now. You multiply by that by 3, it's 21. Very easily could get to 25, right? You take the 13 steals, multiply it by 3, like 39. Let's say 40. Say 25 steals, 40 home runs, 70 to 80 runs, 70 to 80 RBIs. You show me another shortstop who's doing that, right? It's Bobby Witt Jr., it's Trey Turner if he ever gets off his ass, and that's it. Because the other shortstops who are hitting for power, like Lindor, are not stealing 40 bags. So, and then Bichette's not running anymore. And then you've got your Seagers and Francos and Adamises and those guys. My point is if you have Volpe and you can differentiate that at that position by that much that soon without him even hitting, then to me, you're looking at a second rounder. Even at a low average, you're looking at a second rounder for me.
With the lineup too.
Right. And I think Gunnar is in that conversation, but I want to see a little more from him before I include him. Let's take a quick break. We will come back, address pitching in this next segment. It'll probably end up being a pretty short segment giving the pitching thus far. We'll be right back. Pitching rookies.
All right.
Couple sentences of your first impressions looking at the pitcher rookies.
Okay, so I want to harp back to an offline conversation we've had in the past, as far as pitching prospects. We see this in the dynasty leagues we're in. We see it in our league. They tend to be easy to get. People are hesitant because it's a slow process, maybe like a catcher on the hitting side. But our conversation went back to the topic of, can you find a potential elite when they hit that moment where the light goes on, right? And it's worth investing in, and it's worth the bumps. If you have a staff that can support that player that's going to have bumps, and it's realistic, they're going to have bumps unless you're like an older pitcher coming in like a Bryce Miller who has that fastball. So it's worth looking under the hood for players that are going to stand out. The pop-up, like we were just talking about Oviedo with his start this year, a pop-up like him, who's, at max, you don't even think this, but can be a 3-starter, but is not going to be the elite, versus like a player coming up that does have the stuff that's going to struggle, that's going to be that 1-starter eventually. Right. So that's kind of the discernment point, looking under the hood for that.
we both do. We both get really excited about rookies, right? We both roster probably the maximum number of prospects on our team in our hybrid keeper league that we should, and then +1 probably, or +2. What stood out so much to me in just looking at numbers, so I'm usually looking at traits. I'm looking at pitches. I'm looking at, velocity and movement and command, but looking at the actual statistics, what we measure in fantasy amongst these rookies, I was stunned. I have to say, it made me immediately question, should I be investing roster spots in rookie starting pitchers? And the answer is still going to be yes, because the only way to acquire top talent in our hybrid fantasy league, but also in dynasty, obviously, is to go through the bumps in the road with the rookie pitchers, with the young pitchers, because otherwise you're never going to get them, right? For every like Louis Varland is not a typical sort of starting pitcher, nor is Logan Allen, and you see both of those names towards the top of all these lists. Who knew Yiner Cano before this year, right? So can you name for me, we'll play a couple of games, can you name for me the top 5 rookie eligible pitchers in innings so far this season?
In innings, well,
because innings in fantasy are important, right? You need strikeouts, you need we talk about getting innings, hitting innings minimums, all those sorts of things. So who do you think are the top 5 rookies?
I can't even start there. I don't know, because I've been tracking the ones that I think are the potential elites that are being pulled early.
Okay, so Ryan Nelson is 1 with 52. Arizona Diamondbacks right-hander. Hunter Brown is 2 at 50 and 2/3 innings.
And that's a shot.
Kyle Mueller is 3 at 47 innings. What's that?
Just sent down.
He got lit up by the Mariners. Ken Waldachuk is 4.
4.
With 46 innings, 46 horrendous innings, of which I've not benched him for any of them, or maybe 1 start against you.
First me.
And then the 5th is Kodai Senga with 43 innings.
Okay.
So I find it interesting that I did consider Waldachuk elite until this season. We'll talk about that, but I don't see anyone else there that I consider uber elite, right? I think Hunter Brown and Senga have the most upside. I could see them both being middle rotation, high strikeout pitchers, but nobody elite, nobody that we've been talking about, right? None of the buzzy starters are on that list. You look at ERA, I put Cano here because he kept popping up at 0.35 ERA. Bryce Miller, 1.42. Tanner Bybee, 3.18. Hunter Brown, 3.20. Logan Allen, 3.31. So again, Bybee is a top prospect, but just below Gavin Williams and Espino. Hunter Brown was number one in the Astros organization, but only because they had graduated everyone else. And Bryce Miller was someone who you and I talked about, but we got in arguments with people in our leagues about Bryce Miller even being a top 10 pitching prospect coming into the season. And then WAR, same names, Cano, Hunter Brown. Cano's one, reliever is number one, which is hilarious. Hunter Brown, Bryce Miller, Tanner Bybee, Logan Allen. So my point in that is the pitchers thus far this season, for all the talk about Yuri and potentially Andrew Painter at the beginning of spring training, and Taj Bradley, and for me, Ken Waldachuk and Grayson Rodriguez and Gavin Stone and Bobby Miller, the names who have pitched innings thus far and effective innings thus far, for the most part, aren't even on that list. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if it's because teams are holding back some of their most talented pitchers, if it's hard to evaluate pitching. Is this list full of 24-year-olds and that's why, right? What do you think?
It takes a while for the cream of the crop to rise when it comes to starting pitchers. And I think Miller is more of the exception to the rule than the rule itself. Is
Miller Spencer Strider?
It's hard to I'll come to that in a few.
Okay.
But it's hard to pitch in Major League Baseball. It's just like it's hard to catch. It's just tough. I don't think rookie investments are worth it unless you think that player is going to be a 1 or 2 starter in the future.
Okay.
So that's kind of the rule I'm going by. For me, I did it a little differently. I focused on players as opposed to lining up the stats here. And the question I was asking is why is Bryce Miller being successful, and why is G-Rod struggling? He has ups and downs. He's had some good games. And then I put Perez in
pitches.
No, it's to me, it's all number one. The most obvious one is all about location and command, right? We talked about that at length. But the second thing I think is about fastball location, and how good is that fastball? So let me read Perez. But his 4-seamer, which does have a percentile ranking of spin rate at 99%, right? And it's right there with Miller. But 333 batting average off it, 833 slug off his fastball, 97 to 100% elite. Then look at this slider, 118, 302 slug, curve, 111, 111. Nobody's hit his change yet. Nobody's hit Miller's change yet, by the way, too. I think both of them are about 18 pitches. But anyway, but then when you go to G-Rod, 4-seamer, 368, 691 slug. He's not locating his fastball. If you watch the games where the catcher, where Adley's setting up, he's not hitting it at all. And he's getting some bad calls on the corners as well, but that's pretty bad. His best 2 pitches, which made him the number 1 prospect, are selling, right? Slider, they're hitting 250 off it. 250 slug. And his BABIP is 363. So he's getting bad luck on his off-speed pitches. His change, 224, 328 slug off his change. So his off-speeds are working, right? But he's not locating his fastball. Now, if we go to Miller on this fastball theory, what are they hitting off Miller? His 4-seamer, 117. What slug off Miller's fastball? 150. 95-mile-an-hour fastball, 99 percentile when it comes to spin rate on his fastball. So to me, just looking at these 3 players, it's all about the fastball right now.
So people have been critical of Bryce Miller not striking out as many hitters as I think people expected um the last couple of games. And what's interesting to me is, so he struck out 10 against the A's in his debut. Then he struck out 5 against the Astros in 6 innings. And I think the Astros admittedly are not an easy team to face, and they make a lot of contact. He struck out 3. The game where that's interesting that people point to is he struck out 3 Tigers in 7 innings. He went 7 innings, 3 hits, no runs, no walks, 3 Ks. And everyone's saying, where are the strikeouts, right? Tigers a shitty offense.
That was in Detroit.
It was, and I watched the game.
Smart pitching.
Right. I watched the game, and it was pretty clear to me. He was like, well, you're not hitting my fastball. And so I'm just going to pump fastballs. And even if you hit it, you're going to pop it up, right? Because it's got so much spin. And it's a phenomenal pitch. And so as a kid, you're taught, if you keep throwing a pitch until the other team proves they can hit it. So if you can throw a fastball past everyone, there's no reason to throw anything else, right? And I think Miller's kind of at that place right now where he's winning ball games by throwing his fastball. He got hit a little bit by the Braves, but the 3 runs were really because he left with a couple runners on. I don't think he should have gone out for the 7th inning, right? They left him in, he left 2 runners on, and then the bullpen promptly allowed those runners to score. So I don't necessarily put that on him. But I think you're right. I think fastball command is what, and this, I sound like an old pitching coach, but you really have to build off of fastball command. And and for someone like Miller, he's got very good command of the fastball, but the fastball is so good that he can really just fill up the zone with the fastball because no one's proven that they can hit it yet. So the top location plus, so again, I don't totally love the pitch models, but I do think they provide some context. The top location plus pitchers amongst the rookies were Dylan Dodd at 108, Louis Varland at 106, Hayden Wesneski at 105, Logan Allen at 105. So all of those pitchers are not elite prospects, right? But guys who are old enough and are playing, and Wesneski just got sent down. The other pitcher at 105.
They're all like 4 to 5 or 4 starters, right?
Right. The one pitcher with 105 location plus that doesn't fit this was Bryce Miller, right? And so if you can couple this incredible, 70 grade fastball with being able to locate it, you really can do anything else you want off of that. And so I don't think that he really needs to show the gyro or the sweeper or the changeup much as of yet, because he hasn't needed to, right?
Yeah, look at the fastball stats, right? And then you asked the Strider question, right? So if we just take off the curve and the change here from his stats, his slider is 83 batting average, 167 slug off it, right? Along with his 4-seam fastball, 117, 150. Well, shit. Just keep doing those two until they start hitting it, right?
Well, the slider's weird. So he's thrown the slider 57 times, which is a very small sample size, right? And I think the slider is registering more as the gyro, and the curveball is registering a little bit more as a sweeper, if I'm not mistaken. But the slider only has a 9.4% whiff rate. So when hitters swing at the slider, they're hitting it, right? And the XBA and the X slug are much higher than the actual numbers. But I think we need more data on him. I do think his fastball is comparable to Strider. I don't know if he has 100 miles an hour in him in the 7th inning, but I think he has 98. I'm very interested to see what happens with him, and if the fastball is just simply unhittable and he doesn't even need that much else to be effective. But yeah, he's fascinating to me. On Grayson, I think the Grayson stuff is super interesting. I have not watched him as closely as you. I I love the fact that he has very good strikeout numbers despite struggling. I think that's indicative of good things to come. I think I was wrong in ranking him above Yuri Perez, though. I think Yuri
Yeah, I
Perez.
would change that as well. I'd put Perez one and him
I
five.
think Yuri is the top of this group. I think I had Taj Bradley at number 4, which is probably the right place to have him, but I think I underestimated how good he is as well. His K minus BB thus far is 29.7%, which is second only to Cano. And people made a huge deal about him struggling in AAA when he got sent down, but I just think he was working on stuff the same way Bryce Miller was, because he came right back up and struck out a bunch of people. And then stuff plus wise, the top 6 were Mason Miller, which is too bad that he's hurt because he was really, really fun, but I don't know what else to expect with him. I roster him. He's on my injured list. I don't know if I'll ever see him pitch again. But he's at 122. Bryce Miller at 122. Taj Bradley, 114. JP France, kind of interesting, 106. The beloved Luis Ortiz at 105. And Hunter Brown at 105 as well. And then of note, your boy Brandon Pfaadt, 103. Tanner Bybee, 103. Yuri, 102. Varland, 102. Rodriguez, 102. Let me ask you about Pfaadt, since you're the resident expert guy on him. So his thing was fastball location and multiple decent breaking pitches, correct? That's kind of the book on him.
Command over control.
That sounds like I keep hearing Saris and DVR reference pitchers with 2 good breaking balls as something you want to target. The only pitcher that really comes to mind with 2 very good breaking balls and a shitty fastball is Joe Musgrove. And Joe Musgrove didn't take off until he figured out the fastball a little more and he reduced the fastball usage. I'm not in the market for pitchers that have shitty fastballs. I'm sorry. That to me screams middle of the rotation if you reach your peak. I don't know that that's going to be a hittable fastball is okay. I think George Kirby's fastball is hittable, but not this. The Brandon Pfaadt stuff. He does not look good to me at all. I think he's a 3-4 guy. What's your take on Pfaadt? Pfaadt, whatever it is.
He's always been a 3 guy. I don't think he's anybody was expecting him to be uber elite. Who are you looking at?
I'm messing with you. I'm just talking smack.
You had him just notes here. You had him ranked higher than I did on the preseason rankings.
That was reactive on your part.
Yeah, I like the Musgrove comparison. Musgrove got hit hard when he first came up. Yeah. He was ultimately traded from Houston to Pittsburgh because of that. And Pittsburgh noticed something in him. He got his velos up a little higher. But now he's struggling again in San Diego. So yeah, I think that's a fair comp. And I think even Musgrove, if we talk him, I think coming into this year, people ranking him as a 2 starter, it was way too high. He had a great year. He peaked as a 2. He peaked into that 2 sphere, but no, he's a 3 starter, and he could be dependable if Pfaadt goes to a good team in a better ballpark. He could be that 3. Yeah, I don't have a debate there with on Pfaadt.
I think with the 2 of us, I think we skew so far towards, or we have historically skewed towards kind of elite talent and hoping that they're great, as opposed to a pitcher like Pfaadt. Interestingly, 2 pitchers that I want to bring up that I ranked very highly who have pitched poorly thus far. I think this year I tried to approach it a little differently. I love Gavin Stone. I still think Gavin Stone is going to be very good. He just hasn't been able to locate his fastball. yet in the majors, and I'm not quite sure why, but he's still getting swing and miss on the changeup. He's not in good counts, and he doesn't have good enough stuff where he can get into hitters counts and still dominate, right? He's got to get ahead. He's got to get strike one with the fastball. He's got to locate, and he doesn't have a good enough fastball to be able to not locate it, right? If he doesn't locate it, it's getting hit. And then the breaking balls are not elite either. I would say the slider is above average, but not plus. And the changeup is the elite pitch, right? That's the 70 grade pitch, but you can't really get to the changeup if you're not locating the fastball. I have confidence he will. We saw him dominate in the minors. I don't think that's worth nothing. Dodgers are the Dodgers, right? I think they're going to get him squared away. And with May's injury and Urias's injury, and Gonsolin being a porcelain doll and Kershaw being Kershaw, I think that Stone and Miller are going to pitch. They're going to each get the next, 5 turns in the rotation. Miller is interesting too. I think Miller's going to be great. He looked really good in his first start. He went 5 innings. And then the one where I need to eat some crow is Ken Waldachuk. I think he's been horrible. He's probably one of the worst pitchers in baseball. I believe his ERA as of right now is 6.85. What I saw is a above average fastball that he could locate up and away from a right-hander in a very good sweeper that he could back foot. And I think his stuff has taken a hit since he's gone to Oakland. He's not throwing quite as hard. He's not throwing with quite as much movement. And I think he needed that to be good. So I'm out on Waldachuk. It's too bad. I was excited about him. He was my number 5 rated pitcher, I think, starting pitcher. He's off that list.
You're not completely out on him though, right?
No, I still roster him, and I think he could turn it around, and I like pitchers in Oakland. But as far as having him in the same grouping with, Gavin Williams and Bryce Miller and even a Gavin Stone, I think he's dropped out of that range completely. So it's too bad because I did believe in him. But we now have the sample of the end of last year and 30% of this year to say he's not quite there. He also I've seen him cruise for 3 or 4 innings and then go in the tank and not get some calls. And so I think the potential is there for him to get back, but as of right now, I'm out. What other rookie pitchers are on your list that you want to talk about? And if you had to look at the guys who have debuted thus far, like give me your top, let's say 5 rest of season based on what you've seen.
Top 5 rest of season.
We don't have to order them yet. We can just say.
Yeah. So I think so I watched Yuri yesterday and then heard the game as far as the insight to the people who are talk to the Marlins. He's going to be let loose pretty soon. So they're only letting him go 5 max. I love to see him let loose. So I think he'll be in the top 5 easily. What he's doing is effortless. Now the Colorado game is deceptive. He pitched 4 brilliant innings in a place where the ball doesn't break, and his balls were breaking because he's so over the top with his angles are just elite. And the ERA was hurt because they took him out, and the pitcher that came in allowed the 2 runs to score. If you saw the game, he should have let was it Brazabon? He gave up a swinging bunt, and it was going to go foul, and he picked it up before it went foul, so the bases went loaded. Miami's defense is just laughable, right? And you saw Hampson in center field. I think it was that same inning, fly ball right to him and it dropped right out of his glove. So, yeah. But anyway, I could see him in the top 5. Miller, obviously, in the top 5. I could see the other Miller in the top 5. I could see him catching on better than Stone just because he has that fastball right now. And I'm not knocking Stone long term. What concerns me about Grayson is just the NL East and the competitiveness there. So I'm hesitant. I'm hesitant to put him in the top 5 because he's just so ebb and flow when it comes to his starts. I think I could see him having some elite starts coming up. But you know, it's tough to say in that environment. I could see him breaking out more next year, especially as he gets the innings going. Yeah, so those are, you know, and then you get like the Varlins, those types that are going to do decently just because they're on good teams. They're going to appear to be like these, you know, number 3 starters now that are going to blossom to number 1s with the hype, but that's not the case. So yeah,
Yuri, I think, is head and shoulders above all of them. He'd be 1 for me. I think I'd have Taj Bradley and Bryce Miller kind of side by side next. And then I think Hunter Brown, as much as I'm not a fan, I think he's going to be in that mix the rest of the year. Just partly Houston voodoo and partly, you know, age and maturity. I think there is something about these pitchers as they get older being better, right? The rookies, you have to have transcendent talent like a Yuri Perez to be 20 years old and be great, right, from the outset. Otherwise, I think it's fair to say, like, targeting pitchers who are a little bit older, who have a little more experience under their belt, they're much more likely to have a like lower or higher valleys, right? They're not gonna go like this as much, and because the pitchers we're naming are exactly those guys. It's Bryce Miller at 24. It's Hunter Brown, I believe, is 24. Like the Logan Allens and the Louis Varlins, and these guys are in their mid-20s, right? And they've pitched enough in the minors to have a little bit more of a grasp of what's going on. So again, for me, it's Yuri 1, Taj and Bryce Miller kind of in that next group. I wouldn't be surprised to see Bobby Miller get there. I don't think we've seen enough yet. And then kind of your Hunter Brown, maybe Brandon Pfaadt if he has the opportunity. I'd put Gavin Stone in that group. I still think Gavin Stone will get there. But my takeaway from all this is pitching's hard, right? Pitching's hard. Predicting pitching as fantasy owners is just as difficult. I look at all these names and I get super excited, and then I look at their numbers and I'm like, none of those guys have over a 14% swinging strike rate, right? Even Yuri is at 13.7. Senga, for all the Ghost Fork, Rob Friedman, Pitching Ninja, you know, tweets we've seen, is at 11.9%, right? And so pitching is difficult, and I think counting on, I'm not where Eno is. Eno's saying like he's out on rookie pitchers, and
oh, he is. He's saying,
yeah, I'm not there because I think there's value in a lot of these guys. Even if you have them for 10 starts, I think there's, you know, I think about Kyle Harrison coming up and Gavin Williams coming up, and I think those 2 guys are going to have tremendous fantasy value down the stretch. But pitching's hard, and I think there's a reason why we roster in our hybrid keeper, you know, 4 or 5 hitting prospects and 1 pitching prospect. Just because the pitchers are harder to peg.
And a lot of it's that narrative, right? That holistic story that goes with each pitcher. We mentioned Kopech at the start before we turn this on, right? He's now 7 innings, 2 hits, 9 Ks versus Cleveland.
Yep.
And he just pitched 8 innings, 1 hit ball last time. So and at the start of the year, when was it? He opened versus the Giants, 5 home runs. You know, everybody was saying he's done, right? You know, what's up with him? So there's just that broader narrative, especially of those who do have the stuff to be elite.
Right.
When does that light go on, right? And I even think of our generation, like Gooden, what's that? That's 40 fucking years ago, right?
That's scary, bro.
Yeah, I know. But when he came up, he was untouchable, right?
38
but what other starter came up like that in the last 40 years, right? And if we look at the people that came up the same time, Clemens struggled, right? Even a Mike Scott struggled until he got the split finger, right? So the elites of his time didn't come up like Gooden came up.
Randy Johnson was horrible when he got
Yeah, exactly.
he was traded with Brian Holman and Gene Harris for Mark Langston, right?
Uh-huh.
Because he was just seen as not being able to hit the broadside of a barn.
Yeah, so somebody needs to ask, what the fuck was he expecting, right?
Right.
They could have these great stuff, but it just takes so long to develop and for that light to go on.
Yep. Well, Fernando came up in the early 80s, Gooden in 84, 85.
84.
In 80, I think what was the year he went 20? He went 24-4 with a 1.53 ERA. I think that was
I
in
think that was his second year, right?
86. And I think
86.
85 was his rookie year. But yeah, you know, CC Sabathia might be one. I think Sabathia was pretty good as a rookie. Um, but yeah,
Even Verlander, he wasn't K'ing people in his first year, right? And he was kind of a mediocre, like 3.79 ERA with
maybe Jose Fernandez, maybe like but you're grasping, right? And this is like you're talking about every 5 years sort of thing, not every year. So the Bryce Miller, Spencer Strider thing, I need to see more out of Bryce Miller's gyro and sweeper to start to make that comp at all. I don't really know what to think of Bryce Miller yet. I love him. I'm not moving him, right? I'm glad that I have him, but I don't know until I see swing and miss on the secondaries. I don't know. I can't really make a decision as to how good I think he's actually going to be yet.
Mm-hmm.
So rookie of the
Look at the
year,
Mariners, though. That's like future Atlanta, future A's when they had Hudson and Zito.
Yep.
It's like they have the three now, and then they have Wu coming up, who's just killing it in the minors. So
Even Hancock. Hancock's been striking guys out.
Hancock's been doing better too, huh?
So you've got, and it's interesting because they're not acknowledging how good the Mariners pitching is. Like doing the Mariners podcast and watching the games, I think in like detail.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about 4 legitimate, like top half of the rotation starters in Castillo, Kirby. I'd say Kirby's the one, right? Kirby, Castillo, Gilbert, Miller. You can pretty much count on ERAs below 3.75, maybe, in a big park. And then, yeah, like we said, there's Hancock, there's Wu. You certainly have Flexen and Gonzalez, who I don't like, but are serviceable fit starters if you have to. You have Walter Ford down in A ball. Like there's Tyler Dollard is serviceable. There's a ton of the fact that the Mariners have this kind of golden age of pitching, I think is not being talked about enough. Super fun, super fun. I assume Corbin Carroll's your NL MVP or NL Rookie of the Year as of right now.
Yes.
Mine too.
I'm sticking with both my predictions. I'm sticking with Carroll and Volpe.
I think Carroll and Volpe are safe picks as of right now. Next pod, I assume we'll come back with some of the more recent call-ups and probably do at some point as things settle down an updated full top 100.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Anything else?
Nope. No. Looking forward to all the games today.
That's right. This was fun.
All right, man.
We'll see you soon, brother. Thank you.